European viewers are watching the US election very closely because what is decided in the US affects us here very strongly, whether it's NATO policies towards armed states such as Russia or it's the escalation with Iran. Because as we saw with Iraq, the invasion in Iraq created the basis for the refugee crisis, which gave a lot of fuel to the far right. So there's a lot of tension when things start to escalate with Iran. And even our domestic spending, social spending is affected because the US pressurizes countries like Germany into increasing their military budget for NATO. And as Bernie Sanders came into the political arena and even smaller figures like Tulsi Gabbard, there was a lot of mention of the military-industrial complex, and there was some sort of hope coming, especially from the German left, that perhaps US aggressiveness will take a step back. But now as Bernie's out and we have Biden or Trump going to be in the power in the next election or in the fall. So what is your opinion between these two? Is Joe Biden or Donald Trump going to be more aggressive if you look at it from the European perspective?
I personally favor the view of Noam Chomsky on this, which is that, your vote, now that Bernie is out, your vote in November is not an expression of your own political beliefs. It's not an expression of what your soul is. Voting for Joe Biden is not in any way an endorsement of him or his career. But when you're presented with two bad choices, if you're rational and you care about the world, it's your responsibility to do your part to bring about the least harmful choice. And I think in the case of Trump versus Biden, it's rational to predict that under Trump, more people will suffer and die. Whereas under Biden, I don't expect anything good to come out of a Biden administration, but there's the chance that at least with a popular movement, Biden could be pressured to do less awful things. Whereas under Trump, there's no chance of that at all. So I think to me, it's, I think that this issue of voting gets too much attention. It's not at the center of political strategy. It's literally, as Chomsky says, something that happens once every 4 years, and you have a responsibility to make the best choice on that one day. But that doesn't, by voting for Biden does not mean that everybody sits at home and does nothing and expects that Biden does good. No, it's just simply we try to put in the least worst person in possible and then do all the work we can to try to pressure Biden in a better direction. Under Trump, it's simply been all you can do under Trump is there's no good that Trump can do. All you can do as a mass movement under Trump is try to stop the Trump administration from doing its worst. That's where all the energy goes. So to me, it's a pretty simple question, and I think there's understandably so much anger at the Democratic Party establishment for sabotaging Bernie, and there's so much distaste for Joe Biden because what's there to like about Joe Biden? Nothing. He's had an awful career, but it's a question of looking at the choice we have in front of us. And to me, it's the most moral act we could do is prevent the worst outcome and do what we can to prevent the most people from suffering and dying. And I think if you look at what Trump has done on every issue, whether it's domestically or around the world, it's just been awful. He killed Obama's nuclear deal and reimposed the murderous sanctions on Iran. Joe Biden is so weak that he can't even unequivocally commit to rejoining the nuclear deal. But certainly, I think there's a much more chance of Biden returning to the nuclear deal than there is of pressuring Trump to return to it. Trump is trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela and imposing murderous sanctions. Trump has gotten NATO countries to spend more money on weapons, and he's pressuring Germany and Russia to stop a gas pipeline. So all these things that, where people thought maybe Trump was going to be anti-war somehow because he said a couple of anti-interventionist things on the campaign trail. It was all con. It was a scam. And we're deluding ourselves to think that somehow Trump on anything could somehow be better. The only thing that Trump has done is just laid bare how corrupt and decayed our establishment is. But that's not a problem just of Trump. That is bipartisan. And so, that's the only thing that Trump has been good for. Let me say just a word too on Bernie as well. One of the reasons why I was so opposed to Russiagate is because Russiagate to me was not just a fake way to resist Donald Trump. It was also a way for the people who lost the election of 2016 to avoid becoming the party of Bernie Sanders. Because what was the message of 2016? Trump, this con man, painted himself as an anti-establishment candidate, and he won. He beat the establishment. So the obvious lesson there for the Democratic establishment that lost would have been to adopt genuine anti-establishment policies that they could challenge Trump with and show that they're a real anti-establishment alternative as opposed to Trump. But of course, doing that would have challenged the privilege and power that the people who lost in 2016 enjoy within the system. So they couldn't do that. So they needed a boogeyman. They needed an excuse. And that excuse was Russia. And their main way to resist Trump, quote unquote, was not to pose a real alternative to his policies, not to embrace single-payer health care, not to embrace, higher wages for the working class. It was to oppose him via this dumb conspiracy theory. And that was not just a way to pretend to resist Trump. It was also a way to avoid becoming the party of Bernie Sanders. And then when Bernie Sanders got close to the nomination, what happened? On the eve of the Nevada caucus, we got this leak from the U.S. intelligence officials saying that there's intelligence showing that Russia is trying to help Bernie Sanders win. So the narrative that many progressives unfortunately were enrolled in for 3 years was ultimately used to help destroy Bernie Sanders and undermine him, which is why it is such a tragedy that so many leftists got duped into being a part of it. And there's a lesson for us to learn there, I hope, going forward, so that the next time there's a real candidate like Bernie Sanders, his base, his movement in media and elsewhere has not been spending time lending credence to narratives that will ultimately be used to undermine them.
I want to go a bit deeper into this, and I want to talk about personal priorities. You have been doing a lot of work against Russiagate, as you just mentioned. For example, Joe Biden said once in 2017 at the World Economic Forum, talking about Russia's interference in the US and Europe, he said, let me quote, "It's not just the United States that has been targeted. We have seen the same kind of attacks in the past, and many countries of Europe slated to hold elections this year. We should expect further attempts by Russia to meddle in the democratic processes." And later he said, "It will occur again, I promise." We also saw it this year in CBS News that Biden said the Russians don't want me to be nominee, and then he later added, "They like Bernie." And we know about Julian Assange that when he was asked at NBC Meet the Press, he was asked whether Assange is closer to the Pentagon paper publications by Daniel Ellsberg, whether his story is similar to him, or whether he's a high-tech terrorist. And Biden clearly stated that he considers Assange being a high-tech terrorist. Now, these are two issues that you have been really strongly, I would say, journalistically putting a focus on. How do you do this, that despite this person being against these two issues, that you see a greater good in Biden in terms of influencing public policy, while you mute these two issues and say, okay, I would swallow them for the greater good? How do you go around with this dilemma? Because I think that's what progressives, they have certain issues that they weigh much heavier than other issues, and that's why they have a hard time voting for Biden, even if it's just for one vote and then going out on the streets the next day. It's just a very difficult decision to make. So maybe your perspective can provide shed some light on this.
Again, I have nothing positive to say about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's career stands for everything that I oppose. He is a servant of Wall Street. He led the charge on the Democratic side for the Iraq War. He supported countless inhumane and destructive policies. But this is not just about my own personal feelings, and it's not just about Joe Biden. You have to make a rational assessment, not just of these individuals, Biden or Trump, but the people around them. And Trump is surrounded by fanatic neocons. Mike Pompeo is a sociopath. That's not to say there aren't sociopaths on the Democratic side, but the difference is that the Democratic Party does have to answer to a base inside its party that does come from the working class. There are unions who are influential inside the Democratic Party. They have to answer to, they can't completely ignore the progressives. The progressives are a part of the Democratic coalition, and the progressives, if organized, could push Democrats in a more humane direction. I mean, that's why, Obama did some awful things, but he did reach the Iran deal. And now he did it in a very cynical way, but he at least did it. He also opened up relations a little bit with Cuba. Trump has all walked that back. So this is not to say that Obama is a good person or that Obama is a progressive or that Biden is a good person. It's that when you have less awful people in power, you have windows of opportunity to do some positive things. As Chomsky says, the smallest differences between the world's most powerful people can make a world of difference to the most vulnerable. And I just think that's not a reflection of anything positive of anybody on the Biden side. It's just a reflection of just the reality of how bad the people around Trump are. And I don't want Venezuela to be suffering under these murderous sanctions, or Iran or Cuba. Under Trump, we're guaranteed that those sanctions remain. I mean, look at, no matter how much the coup attempt in Venezuela fails, Trump keeps doubling down. Same with Iran. I mean, what Trump is doing with Iran is scary. It almost led to war a few months ago, and it led to only because Iran was relatively restrained in responding to the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. So there's no contradiction in saying that I don't like Biden at all, and I have no faith in his integrity, and saying I do think that it's possible an organized mass movement could possibly push Biden to be less worse than Donald Trump. It's just a reflection of just how reactionary and right-wing the Trump administration people are.
To my last question, and as you mentioned that Obama, there was a compromise with Cuba possible and with Iran a deal. Also, we saw the pardoning of Chelsea Manning, even if it was not at the best of conditions. We saw that happening. But on the other hand, so many other facts are coming from other progressives that, oh, he increased the nuclear modernization and he did this and that. I don't want to focus on this. I want to focus on whether you think compromise in unity within the left is now possible, or whether this fracture is permanent, because one would expect no compromise possible with the reactionary forces that function with, let's say, impulsive reasoning, if you could even call it reasoning. But you would at least expect this. If we consider the left to be more reflectionary about thinking about reasons why people vote a certain way, why their conditions are like this, why white working class people have voted for Trump. We think about the underlying reasons. You would expect the left to be a little more open to within each other, not with the reactionary forces, but within each other. But it seems that the reactionary forces are on both ends of whether people who are trying to advocate for Biden or against Biden. So do you think this fracture is permanent, or do you see a way out within the left?
I do think that the neoliberal Democratic Party establishment has to be destroyed, because I think they're an obstacle to progress. And I think that ultimately the function that they've served is to, suck up progressive liberal energy and channel it into something fundamentally corrupt and militarist. And they've done that repeatedly. So, but the way to do that, if you could show me that re-electing Donald Trump would bring us closer to defeating the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, I can be open to that argument. But look, Trump won in 2016, the neoliberals lost, but they're still around. They're still very much in power, and because they still control, pretty much the media, and they have a huge sway in Congress. So they're not going anywhere. So just because they lose an election, I don't see how that brings us closer to them being unseated. What brings us closer to them being unseated is building up a mass movement based in unions and workers, popular movements, and people with basic principles like everybody should have health care, and basically forcing the establishment to either fall in line or get out. And maybe that means forming a third party. But I don't think that any of that political project involves helping to reelect Donald Trump. And, in terms of reconciling within the left, I mean, look, it's been a bitter time, and the tactics that have been used to undermine Bernie Sanders were really harsh and cynical. So there are people who, unless they apologize for that, shouldn't be forgiven. But look, we have a short-term issue, which is that in November there's an election. If Donald Trump wins re-election, not only do all these murderous policies against different governments continue, But, Trump is literally, as Chomsky talks about, threatening planetary extinction with his nuclear policies. I mean, yeah, Obama did modernize the nuclear arsenal. By the way, Biden claims that he opposed that, which I don't know if that's true, but he does claim that. But Obama also did reach some vital nuclear accords, namely the New START treaty with Russia, which Trump, after already tearing up the INF treaty, which is a vital nuclear treaty, Trump is now threatening to kill the New START treaty too. So that would be the last remaining limitation on the nuclear stockpiles of the world's top two nuclear powers. And if that one is killed, then, it's like we're just accelerating the path to extinction. So there are plenty of issues on the left to work out, and they should be worked out. And we shouldn't have to pretend that people like Joe Biden and his camp are our allies. But that doesn't negate the fact that there is a choice in November, and one of those choices accelerates the path to world destruction. And I would rather go with the path that decreases the risk of world destruction, if only just a little bit.